We're very excited to have this conversation right now. The focus of this is really to see that, or the context to all of this is really the fact that because of COVID-19, all of us know that people have been working from home. There's a lot of companies who've been able to kind of pivot to make sure that employees have been effective from home as well. And so the idea is that because of this, there have been a lot of conversations that have started as to whether this newfound mobility for employees is a good thing or a bad thing. Are they finding positives from it? Is it something that employers would like to sustain into the future? And we thought that we'd have a conversation, and I'd love to know the panel members' thoughts around this. And so, what we're going to do is we're going to talk through this in three broad categories. The first is really around organization, operations, and culture. The second is a little bit about technology, and then what that means for space and space design is really that third part that we're looking to discuss. So I think maybe I'll start off with Yatin. Yatin, in your experience, as you've been having your conversations with clients, have you found that all of the different clients have been able to pivot to this work from home component and give employees that mobility equally easily, or have you found that there are certain sectors that have, say, been able to do it better and faster than others?
So, by and large, most of the organizations have had to, all large organizations have had to transition into the work from home situation. Uh, Nobody had a choice but to go ahead with that way. But yes, there have been some that have adopted it much faster than the others. So, there were and all of us on the panel have these as our clients, the large tech companies. Those are the first ones who had a very easy transition because some of them were already on agile and mobile work methodology. So for them, it was fairly straightforward and more or less falling into the lab kind of situation. Whereas as we speak, some fintech companies, which you mentioned, that always had the technology to do it, but weren't really of the mindset to really get into it. Those that have transitioned into that fairly quickly as well. But there have been challenges for others. What's interesting to see is of how many were and how many industries could get into the work from home model. So, if you categorize it can't be categorized as industries, but it's from the type of work. So let's say an industry like the pharma industry or the auto industry or the banking industry, even within those, there are different setups. So like a pharma company, there would be the R&D centers, or for that matter, even the auto manufacturers, there would be the manufacturing, which would be different. There would be the R&D that would be different. So some parts of the R&D could get into the work from home fairly quickly and adapt to that. But they would still need to come into the office. I'll give you an example. We're doing a couple of projects for for the semiconductor industry. So we're doing a project for NVIDIA, which is about 500,000 square feet. And they've got a large number of labs within the space. So some of the people are developing hardware, some are doing software. So the software engineers could work from home, whereas the hardware engineers could do a portion of their work from home, but would still to come into the office to test, and access the lab. So it's a mixed way of putting it. And you say that a lot of companies have adapted fairly quickly. Some struggled, but have ultimately got down to it. We as architects, some of us moved into it very quickly.
Yeah.
I don't know about the others who haven't moved into it, but we
Fair
moved
enough.
work from home fairly quickly.
Fair enough. So, in that case, Sabina, probably I'll ask you next in terms of you, again, especially when you're helping design spaces for employees. What are you hearing from the employee standpoint? Are you hearing that there is a certain propensity, say, now that they're working from home full time, that they continue to work from home full time? Do they want to come back to the office full time? I mean, or are you kind of seeing some sort of a hybrid that they're looking at, where it's part time from home, part time from the office? Well, what are you hearing most from the companies that you're talking with?
Yeah. So this pandemic really forced people to look at the work from home option. And, the surveys are showing two trends. Work from home is used by a lot of people. There are a lot of advantages to it. At the same time, there are some disadvantages depending upon the age, depending upon the gender, and also depending upon the geography. We are finding female employees are quite liking the concept of working from home. We find that, for example, when we did a survey globally, in the US and the UK, it's adapted much more easily than some of the Asia Pac countries. Culturally, where health situations are dense, people are finding it more comfortable to go back to the office. They're not able to work from home. So yes, and
Right.
hybrid model is also something people are looking at, and that is something that we may look for. However, it's been only 6 months, and can we establish trends based on the 6 months? Are we still in a honeymoon period? What is it going to be after 6 months? These are questions to look forward to.
That's actually a very valid point, Sabina. So, have you seen any difference, as you rightly described, when the work from home thing started initially, that it was kind of like a honeymoon period? When everyone was just overjoyed at the aspect of spending more time with their family. There was so much more personal interaction that was going on between employees, colleagues. Are you seeing that sustained by and large, or are you starting to see maybe a couple of shifts that are happening already as we're 6 months into this experiment?
Yeah, so as Yatin was rightly saying, it also depends upon, even in an industry, what is the function? Are you into sales? Do you need to meet new clients? Do you do something else which is much more easier done at home? But I think it's 6 months is something that we may not be able to establish a trend, and is it really sustainable?
Right.
Has the office gone away? For sure, we're seeing that people do need to connect back. The community is important. So will the office space change to allow for larger amounts of social interaction versus focused work?
Right.
Will that change? And is that why people are going to come back to the office? I think some connection with the workspace will continue to be there. People do need to connect back. It may be the type of work fundamentally would change in the office, and that's why you may need to look at the design of the office space differently.
Right, right, perfect. And with that, I think maybe I'll transfer to Mr. Deben, Moza. So basically, I think one of the things that has been touched upon so far is the fact that if we're looking at something like a hybrid work style, so far traditionally, say issues like or aspects like company culture used to be really fostered within a campus or within the workplace, and now when we're trying to look at a hybrid work style, where work from home is equally integrated into day-to-day operations. Are you starting to hear a change in how organizations are starting to think about company culture in this hybrid work style scenario, or is it still that the workplace? Are you hearing companies essentially say that the workplace is where the company culture still really resides?
The first lockdown took everybody by surprise, and nobody had prepared for the work from home strategy. It
Hmm.
happened. This is a very large experiment which worked. Uh, but over a period of 6 months, we've seen that, uh, and we know that one size can't fit all. You have various functions which can operate from home, and various functions that cannot. And Yatin and Sabina touched upon those. So what we see in last 6 months, the shift uh, from when this whole thing happened, there was a lot of excitement, as you mentioned, that people wanted to be at their home. But what it has done in last 6 months is that it's actually created an imbalance between work-life balance, right? You don't know when to start your day and when to end your day. You go to office, you collaborate with people, you share ideas. So, there are statistics. I might must read out to you that 20% of the employees feel that the collaboration and the communication is missing now. 20% feel loneliness because they're just confined to four walls of their home or apartment. 18% are not able to unplug their systems. And there are distractions at home. And then you have staying motivated, reliable Wi-Fi. We were discussing about the challenges we have in India. And then again, when you go to office in earlier pre-COVID days, you would plan your holidays, you'll plan, everything was planned. Your work was planned, your personal life was planned. It's gone for a toss. But what we've learned here is that with this kind of pandemic, we can survive from remote locations. And what we will see in future, maybe decentralization of the offices. We have suburban co-working spaces emerging. People don't have to travel distances. And believe me, offices won't be dead. Offices would remain. I think the function would change. They will become a social interaction place for people to come, exchange ideas and go. And people would start working with the flexible model. When they want to come to office, they'll come to office. It's not forced. Nobody is going to check your attendance, all those things. So we will see a shift from that. And as Microsoft's CEO Satya Nadella said that the whole transformation, which was to take in 2 years' time, took place in 2 months' time. So it has actually triggered the whole transformation of digitization.
Right. Now, that's actually a very valid point as well. The shifting purpose of the workplace, as well as how some things have certainly gotten accelerated. And with that, Akshay, do you find that organizations right now, as far as their operations and their culture aspects are concerned, are they still in the process of evaluating how they would like to sustain this kind of a hybrid work style into the future? Or are you already starting to see organizations that are taking concrete steps to kind of formalize any kind of framework to try to say, okay, this is how we're going to operate into the future? Are you starting to see any of that on the ground?
Sure. Thanks for that. So, as Sabina mentioned, obviously it's too less a time frame to be able to establish a trend. But and more so, the fact is that most of the organizations haven't come back to workplace yet. So they know whether the work from home is working or not working, or to what extent is it working. But how will it coexist with getting back to work? That's not a known yet. I'll give you an example. So for our own office, when we had to get back to work, and we were looking the month of June, July, our clients wanted our sites to start. So we had to, that bit of the work had to start any which case, right? So we went back to the sites first. Whatever could not be done being offline had to be done in person. Those activities obviously got started first. And that's how most of the organizations would do. Wherever it's not possible to do manufacturing and stuff like that, they will get back to the workplace. But elements which don't necessarily need a workplace to work, that's what's going to take some time for people to get back with. In fact, we did a survey with IA in the month of April and May, and we looked at both sides of the story. We looked at the employer's perspective, and they were saying that we will need to invest more into workflow for home practices and policies going forward in the long term. That wasn't part of the agenda for a number of firms in different sectors, so that's going to be now a part of the agenda for sure. And then investment in technology to distribute work, to be able to track work. I think those are the elements that organizations are going to really invest on going forward. From an employee perspective, I think the numbers that we got were starker than what Deben was mentioning. What people mentioned was around 90% of the people felt face-to-face interactions were missing face-to-face interactions was a big deterrent. And that's something that people are really vying for. Collaboration with colleagues, people were missing by 55%. Having a routine by itself, people were missing 30% of the people were missing that. Ability to concentrate, which is a big thing in nuclear families, in joint families, which are the order of the day for most part of India. There, having the ability to concentrate on an ongoing basis is very difficult. 25% people miss that. And then a variety of workplace to work from. So that's again something that people missed. I think what's going to happen is, and most of the firms were talking about the fact, we heard by 2025 there'll be only 25% of people working from home. We heard that entire 21 people don't need to get back to office. And I think that thought process is changing. Microsoft did a survey earlier this month, and they released the results saying that good 33% of the people are facing this fatigue because of work from home, no ability to divide time between personal and professional lives, and good 40% of them having challenges to be able to work from home. So all of these combined, it's going to be a mix. What percentage is going to be each organization? We'll need to dwell deeper to figure out what mix works for them best. But yeah, it's going to be a mix for sure.
That's actually very insightful, Akshay, and I think it's a perfect segue to what the next section would really be about. And Yatin, basically, I think we were discussing about this very briefly, but
Shravan, but just on that, Shravan, sorry, but just on the same topic, I think it's important to look at it from a different lens and to look at the demographics, the geography, and the infrastructure from what people have at their homes and where they're located and what age bracket and gender they're from. And so we did mention about gender, but it's really important that we really understand that first. Majority of our workforce, I think about 45% of our workforce is under 30. And more or less, and most of them are single. So that demographic, really works differently, and they would want to go to the office, right, to socialize and to enjoy the comforts of an office. Whereas the 30 to 40 would be married, and most of them would be married, right? So they wouldn't mind working from home, but then they would have space constraints. Whereas the next lot of people would be a little more evolved, and the affordability would be higher, so they could have a larger space and would be able to work from home. Again, depending on what line of business they are in, what kind of work they do, that's all subjective. But it's important to understand all of these three aspects and put them in the.
That's actually very valid, for sure. It's not going to be a broad stroke solution. It will have to be broken down by the many different types of people who are going to work based on, as you rightly pointed out, it may be family situations, it may be economic, it may be infrastructure related, demographics, all of that. Akshay brought up a whole bunch of different points around, some of the concerns that people are raising of things that aren't, say, as happening as effectively as they could because of the whole work from home situation. Do you see that there are any, say, or do you think technology can come in and alleviate some of that? Or do you think that there is going to, or the kind of problems that Akshay is talking about do have to be dealt with in a way that you just have to get people together, and that's the only way to solve that?
So there are a lot of collaboration tools. We are using a collaboration tool right now. We have Zoom, we have Teams, and we're all using all of those collaboration tools. We're using them fairly well, but like Akshay said, there's a lot of fatigue. Earlier you had meetings, structured meetings, but you had the break one meeting to the other. You had the corridor talk. You had the coffee break that you. So there was, socialization. There was interaction, which today does not exist. We're working from 9 a.m. till 8 p.m. and we've got all of these structured meetings back to back with no break. So there is a lot of fatigue that's creeping into people. Earlier, when the lockdown had started and people had started working from home, people enjoyed it, and people thought that this is the way the future would be. But a lot of fatigue has started creeping in. Uh, but technology can only do certain things, but the one-on-one personal interaction will not really be replaced by just technological tools. But, you know, like we've been mentioning, fatigue is creeping in. People will want to come back to work, and like
Mhm.
I mentioned earlier, we'll have to look at the demographics, infrastructure, and geography of how this whole thing pans out. And again, like Sabina mentioned, this is too early.
Right.
And Sabina mentioned it's only been 6 months. Sabina, it's long enough. We don't want this to stay for much longer. But yes, it is too short a period as an indicator to identify a trend.
Understand. And Sabina, from the standpoint of what Mr. Yatin was just talking about, um, do you see there being any change in conversations again with people that you're talking with in terms of the kind of technology that would now need to be deployed in the office? So I think as Mr. Patel rightly mentioned, where we have a lot of tools where we can do sort of say static collaboration in the sense that if we want to have either a conversation or if we want to present something, you have a lot of those tools available and you're able to do that from multiple locations. Is that changing the conversation of what technology within the workplace could do? Because earlier it was more about things like being able to do a Skype call on a larger screen, and that was about it. Do you see any change in the conversation that you're having with clients on technology?
Yeah, I mean, you're mostly in virtual meetings these days. So how do we enhance these virtual technologies? How do we enhance the presentation technologies? So these are all going to change. And safety and wellness is also crept in to the office space. So we're also talking about technology in terms of contactless doors, in terms of temperature screening. So yes, there's a lot of, I think there's going to be a lot of interesting developments in the technology space and how it supports this virtual collaboration and how it supports this new office in terms of how people will now interact and how these spaces will evolve. We're seeing a lot of AI also coming in and some interesting developments over there. So it's going to be an interesting space to watch over the next few months.
So far, what had kind of happened is, a lot of the workplaces that we've had in this, and I'll ask Sabina this, a lot of the workplaces we've had have been so determined or driven by density, say, that, our ability to, say, sometimes develop what we would like to think of as forward-thinking workplaces has been constrained by that in some sense. The example that Yatin was talking about really helped try to keep, while the density parameter is still kind of kept at that same level, the way that the office is then planned is different. Do you see that this is going to be something that's going to say push forward the nature or the kind of workplaces we've been developing typically for companies? This conversation, do you see that driving, the this forward-thinking aspect of workplaces forward finally in India?
Yeah, so a couple of years back, it was such a struggle to talk about unassigned desking. And while you gave the client the pros and cons of it, they would always come back at the end and say, no, it's one seat per employee. And now with this new situation, we are finding that yes, there's now an openness to think and go and at least allocate a certain percentage for an unassigned desk so that you can free up more space for this collaboration. So for sure, this has given a push to that, especially in our part of the world, where we found that we really needed to push the envelope where we were talking about unassigned desking. So that has really galloped with this current situation. But as Yatin was saying, there are different clients with different solutions. There's some that are not looking to change what they were pre-COVID to now. There are some that are definitely looking at their global standards and seeing what do they need to adopt in India. Now, whatever they're doing globally cannot simply be taken into the Indian environment. What is different and how much percentage of that will they take it over here? And yet some others are now looking to increase their footprint because they do want to increase the density, I mean the back-to-back distances. So some are even looking at an increased floor plate because they do not want to have the densities before. So it's really such a mixed bag, and it's really interesting to see the various, mindset. There is no one solution that we can say that the industry is following.
And I think, as you know, also the follow up that Yatin brought up is that there are a lot of people who are wondering if, or probably clients will ask straight out, come and ask, can we reduce space because of this? And that's such a double-edged question. How would you, or how would you suggest, and how do you take up conversations when someone does approach you saying that we would like to be able to leverage this to be able to reduce space? What's the conversation that you have with them?
I think it's really about them having a corporate culture and a company policy. So it's really about interacting with their own staff and seeing whether they can implement work from home, whether it's something that their company culture allows, whether doesn't impact their productivity and the employees are taking to it. So there will need to be a lot of interaction and a lot of workshops with the employees themselves. And now the question is, who will drive this? What support do these clients need to drive these kind of sessions where there is a conversation about, can we free up the real estate? Now, from a real estate standpoint, it's interesting times, because yes, it's very tempting to say, can we reduce the real estate space? So there's a big temptation along that. But how does the company actually facilitate an answer and come together with its stakeholders and its employees? And what kind of sessions can we support to make that answer possible? And is it really realistic to pull the real estate down? And as Yatin was saying, what happens tomorrow when that percentage of workforce wants to come back and work in the office? How is that going to be managed?
Right. And Mr. Moser, basically, I think one of the things that you'd mentioned when we were talking a little bit earlier was the idea of, say, co-working spaces in suburban centers starting to support these hub offices. What are the different models that clients are looking at from their workplace standpoint? I think one you were talking about was the hub and spoke model. I'd love for you to talk about it a little bit more. And are there other similar kinds of, or any other kinds of models that they're looking at to try to more conveniently or be able to support the employees' ability to work from different locations?
See, in India, for people to travel long distances, we need to provide that infrastructure, and we don't have a great infrastructure in place. And if you take public transport into account, then you are actually risking, your employees contracting this virus.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the thoughts that the corporate real estate heads are debating about is how can they minimize the travel distance from somebody's home to the office place. So then this whole hub and spoke model, you create satellite offices and have a central office, but you do a scan of people in terms of demographics, where they come from, and plan your real estate accordingly. The other solution is like, co-working spaces, smaller co-working spaces being created in suburban spaces, so that people don't have to invest in offices. They can, rent out a couple of days or few days and, operate from there. And the third part is where the corporate real estate heads are actually working on is how to go for the short-term leases. You don't lock your real estate for long-term leases, so you go for short-term leases, or do an enterprise model where you don't have to spend on the office fit out, get the done from the developer or an investor, and just pay the rentals on it. So there are various models which are being worked out, and people, based on their business needs, are adapting to that.
Perfect. And Akshay, in that scenario, since I think everyone on the panel does have a consensus that there is a lot of uncertainty surrounding, how do we really look at real estate right now? There are a lot of questions that people are trying to answer, but at the same time, business must go on as well. So when we're looking at, say, real estate projects in this period of uncertainty, what are some of the things you think that we as an industry should consider to make sure that, say, we're responding, or we're helping clients make their investments in ways that does not lock them out of the future, in a sense? How do you think we go about addressing that level of uncertainty while trying to deliver projects right now?
So one element that has changed from planning principles before to now, or how real estate space was looked at. I think the biggest driver for people or clients taking up space or decisions on how much space to take was all based on benchmarks. Now, those benchmarks could be their own benchmarks within the workplace that they'd set, or industry benchmarks at large. I mean, you didn't need an architect or a designer to tell you how much of square footage. Everybody knew it, that my office or this sector is 100 square feet per person. There were people who were talking about 50 square feet per person, so densities were crazy. But then each of them had a benchmark that they could use to get to how much of space to use. I think that metric was dangerous because each firm is different, employees are different, every aspect of the firm is different. So it's important to analyze that, and that's what a designer or a design firm brings to the table. I think that change of mindset from saying that, okay, everybody is doing it and hence I'll do it, or this is the established benchmark for us, that mindset change is going to really benefit the entire fraternity and the clients at large as well. Because what comes to the center of this equation now is the employee. Where you're going to design for that employee. Office is going to be a pull now. You've got to make sure that people are excited to come back to office. A 3-foot workstation where you don't have an elbow room to move is not going to excite anybody to get back. Now, whether that will mean that it's better because there is no real estate take-up and hence your cost goes down, then that's the model that works for the firm. But if you want people to come back to office for whatever reasons that the firm may have, then the workplace will change drastically. And the other element that will come in extensively beyond just the employee experience is the wellness aspect. So when we are talking about fatigue at home, then people actually want to come back to office also for a reason of creating that wellness quotient, or making sure that their personal professional lives are segregated. They're able to balance their lives out, and office should be able to cater to that. Whether it's better air quality, whether it's better air conditioning systems, all of those will need to be plugged in back into the system.
Perfect. I think that answers that question pretty well. So now I see that we have about a few minutes left in terms of the panel. So maybe I'll just now ask for closing remarks from all four people. And so the big question is, A, will employee mobility that has come out of this pandemic sustain itself into the future? And if that answer is uncertain, what do you think should be done to try to bring certainty around that answer? I'll start with you, Mr. Patel, if you can go first.
So like I said earlier, yes, there is the uncertainty, and it will really depend on organization to organization, the organizational policies that are drawn up. Yes, we all see that work from home is possible to a certain degree for a certain set of people, for a certain type of work that can be done, but definitely not an unending kind of a model where you have just work from home happening. We're already seeing within the 6 and 7 months fatigue creeping in. So there will be people who would want to come back. Now you could set policies like you'll go back to work for a couple of days of the week, but they will still need to go back to work. They will still need to socialize, to interact, to collaborate. And what will be interesting then for us as designers within the space is to see how do we manage that. Now, just to give an example of, let's say somebody is going to the office just for a couple of hours. He's doing his focus work at home, but he has got to go to the office for a couple of hours for a workshop or for a scrum or what have you. And then that individual is taking that opportunity to drop his kid to school, dropping by into the office for a couple of hours, and he chooses to hang around in the office to be able to pick up his kid to go back home. So, he's collaborating for those couple of hours, but is there for a little longer. So how are we going to plan for that person to be able to still work from that office space? Will it be the large desk that we would normally provide to for a focus workstation? Will it be smaller? Those are things that we will be looking at and start working towards and seeing how we change the whole footprint of the office environment.
Perfect. Sabina, how about yourself?
So I think there's a great role for us as the design community to really support the clients during this time to understand, the organization, the culture, what are they doing, and how can we work with them to come up with a solution that is not meant just for this time, and you're future proofing it. You're future proofing a solution that is flexible, it's adaptable, because nobody is knowing what is going to happen. And is it a 6-month situation? Is it a 1-year situation? So the role of the designer is really going to take on possibly another dimension to be able to brainstorm an appropriate solution for a particular client. And it will vary from client to client depending upon what they're doing and what is their culture.
Perfect. Deben?
Yeah, I think sustainability, smart buildings, and digital workplace would reshape the commercial real estate. And if I have to sum up our discussion, like I'll break it up into 8 points. That there is an acceleration in the digital transformation. There is an adoption of workplace for remote working. Travel has lessened, so we can survive without traveling much. Uh, and there would be new ideas about the purpose of the office. We have to rethink about office space. There is there would be more search about what virtual collaboration. Will have optimized office spaces. And I think the most important is the hygiene considerations. I think what we learned from this pandemic is hygiene is critical. So we now realize how important it is for us to keep our offices, clean, safe for people. Those are my points on this.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you so much. And Akshay?
Yeah, from both employee and employer perspective, I think choice and flexibility are going to be, taking cue from what Sabina said, are going to be the core of any design principle. From an organization, as the business environment changes, the ability to adapt the workplace to that changing requirement. And from an employee perspective, a big change that has happened is that there is a huge mindset shift that's happened. That earlier, if I was a working dad and I had to take care of my kid for whatever reason, and I had to stay back home, I had to take a chutti. There was no way that I would get to work sitting at home. Now, today's time, I can actually take that from home. My kid could actually be lingering in the background. It will not be taken as offensive and completely unprofessional, right? That change in mindset, I'm not saying that's advisable, but at the same time, that it is somewhere in between those two zones, and that acceptability has come in, and it's going to remain for sure. And again, each solution is going to be customized to each client, and I think that's where we as designers can play a huge role.
Perfect. That was a really good optimistic note to kind of end this entire thing on. I'm really thankful for all the panelists for having given their thoughts as clearly and as articulately as you have. It was really great to hear a lot of the insights that you put up during our discussion today.